The stagecoach wheels churned up clouds of dust as they rolled to a stop at the edge of Dust Creek. Clara Morrison stepped down, her black morning dress already coated with the fine powder that gave the town its name. She clutched a worn leather satchel containing the last of her parents' papers, deeds, accounts, and most prominently, a ledger filled with debts that seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street, where wooden buildings stood like weathered sentinels against the harsh landscape. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks bare and forbidding, while the surrounding grasslands stretched endlessly, brown and brittle from months without rain. Clara had left this place 3 years ago, full of hope for a new life in Denver. Now she returned alone, her parents buried in the city cemetery, their dreams buried with them. "That the Morrison girl?" she heard someone whisper from the general store's porch. "Heard she's come back to settle her folks' affairs." "More like she's come back with their debts," another voice replied. "Old Morrison owed half the town when he left. That store of his barely broke even in good times." Clara kept her chin high as she walked past, though each word struck like a physical blow. The Morrison General Store stood at the corner of Main and 2nd, its windows dark, a thick chain and padlock across the door. The sight of it made her throat tighten. She remembered standing behind that counter as a child, watching her father weigh out flour and sugar, her mother keeping the books with careful precision. They had been respected then, before the drought of '74 and the bad investments that followed. At the Imperial Hotel, the clerk, a thin man named Josiah Wells, whom Clara remembered from school, looked at her with barely concealed pity. "Miss Morrison," he said, sliding the register across the scarred wooden counter. "Sorry to hear about your parents. The fever took too many good folks this year." "Thank you, Mr. Wells," Clara replied, signing her name with steady hands despite the tremor in her voice. "I'll need a room for... I'm not certain how long." His eyes flickered with something between sympathy and calculation. "That'll be $2 a week, paid in advance. I'm sure you understand, given the circumstances." Clara understood perfectly. News of her family's financial troubles had reached even here. She counted out the coins from her small purse, aware that she had enough for perhaps 3 weeks' lodging if she was careful. After that, she pushed the thought away, one crisis at a time. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the dusty street. Clara set down her satchel and allowed herself a moment to sit on the bed, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the town, horses neighing, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer, the laughter from the saloon down the street. She opened the ledger, though she knew its contents by heart. Her father had borrowed from everyone, the bank, certainly, but also from neighbors, from suppliers, even from friends. The numbers swam before her eyes. $500 to the Dust Creek Savings and Loan, $200 to Patterson's Dry Goods in Denver, $150 to various creditors around town. The total was staggering. Nearly $2,000, more than most people in Dust Creek saw in 5 years. A knock at the door interrupted her calculations. Clara quickly closed the ledger and smoothed her skirts before answering. A woman stood in the hallway, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dress impeccably clean despite the ever-present dust. "Clara Morrison," the woman said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm Mrs. Elmira Carson. I believe your father owed my late husband $40. Clara's heart sank. It had begun already. "Mrs. Carson, I've only just arrived. I need time to assess." "Time, Mrs." Carson's laugh was bitter. "Your father had 3 years of time. I'm a widow now, Miss Morrison. That $40 means the difference between keeping my home and losing it. But I suppose you wouldn't understand that, would you? Coming back here with your city clothes and your educated ways." "I understand more than you know," Clara said quietly. "I'll review my father's records and you'll pay what's owed." Mrs. Carson interrupted. "Or I'll see the sheriff about it. The law's the law, even for those who think they're above it." After the woman left, Clara leaned against the closed door, fighting back tears. She had known it would be difficult, but the reality was harsher than she'd imagined. In Denver, she had been just another face in the crowd. Here, she was the Morrison girl, the burden who had returned to settle debts she hadn't created but had inherited nonetheless. As evening fell, Clara ventured out to the general store, her family's store. The building looked smaller than she remembered, its paint peeling. The sign above the door faded and cracked. She produced the key from her satchel, her hands shaking as she unlocked the padlock. The interior was thick with dust and shadows. Empty shelves lined the walls, and the cash register stood open and empty. Anything of value had been sold off months ago. Her father's letters had told her. All that remained were memories and the lingering scent of coffee and leather that seemed embedded in the very walls. Clara lit a lamp and began to search through the papers her father had left behind. Bills, invoices, desperate letters from creditors, each one a testament to her parents' slow slide into ruin. She found a letter dated just 2 weeks before their deaths, her father's handwriting shaky with illness. "Clara, my dear daughter, if you are reading this, then your mother and I have failed in our fight to save what we built. The store is gone, the debts are many, but please know that we never meant for this burden to fall upon you. Sell what you can, pay what you must, but do not let our failures define your life. You are stronger than you know." The tears came then, hot and bitter. Clara sank into her father's old chair behind the counter and wept for all that was lost. Not just the store or the money, but the life she had imagined for herself, the respectability her family had once commanded, the simple dignity of being able to hold one's head high in the place where one was born. When the tears finally stopped, Clara wiped her face and looked around the empty store. Tomorrow she would begin the grim work of settling accounts, of facing down creditors and calculating what could be salvaged from the wreckage. But tonight, she allowed herself this moment of grief in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of better days. Outside, a dust devil whirled down the empty street, rattling windows and scattering tumbleweeds. The town of Dust Creek settled into another restless night, indifferent to the sorrows of one young woman who had come home to face the sins of the past. In the distance, a coyote howled, its cry echoing off the mountains like a lament for all the dreams that had withered and died under the merciless western sun. Clara rose from the chair and made her way back to the hotel, her steps heavy with exhaustion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations, new reminders of her status as a burden in the eyes of the town. But tonight, she would sleep, and perhaps in her dreams, she would find a moment's peace from the weight of debts that were not her own but had become her inheritance, as surely as the color of her eyes or the stubborn set of her jaw. The stars emerged one by one in the vast western sky, cold and distant as the hearts of those who had already judged her. Clara Morrison had come home to Dust Creek, but home had become a place where she was no longer welcome, where her very presence was a reminder of failures and unpaid obligations. She was, as the whispers had already proclaimed, a burden, and in the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier, burdens were luxuries that few could afford to carry. The morning sun was already fierce when Clara approached the Desert Rose Cafe, the only eating establishment in Dust Creek that served decent meals at prices working folks could afford. She had spent the previous evening cataloging her meager resources, and the arithmetic was unforgiving. If she was to have any hope of settling even a portion of her father's debts, she needed work. The cafe's proprietor, Samuel Hutchins, was a portly man with thinning hair and small, calculating eyes. He looked up from wiping down the counter as Clara entered, his expression shifting from neutral to guarded. "Miss Morrison," he said, the greeting notably lacking in warmth. "Heard you were back in town." "Mr. Hutchins," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, serve tables, whatever you need." Hutchins continued wiping the same spot on the counter, avoiding her gaze. Well now, that's a fine offer, but I'm not sure it would be good for business. You understand, don't you? People talk. About what, exactly? Clara asked, though she knew the answer. About folks who owe money all over town, about the Morrison debts. Can't have my customers thinking I'm harboring someone who might... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound too harsh. Who might not be reliable with the cash register. The accusation stung more than any physical blow could have. Mr. Hutchins, I've never taken anything that wasn't mine. My father's debts are not a reflection of my character. Maybe not, Hutchins conceded. But perception matters in a small town. I'm sorry. Miss Morrison? Try the laundry, perhaps. Mrs. Chen might have something. Clara left the cafe with her dignity intact, but her prospects dimmer. The Chinese laundry was at the edge of town, and Mrs. Chen, while sympathetic, could offer only a few hours of work at wages that would barely cover her daily meals. It was something, but not nearly enough. As the afternoon heat grew oppressive, Clara found herself walking along the nearly dry creek bed that had given the town its name. The water was reduced to a trickle, the banks cracked and parched. She sat on a large rock, removing her boots to cool her aching feet in what little water remained. The cottonwoods that lined the creek were skeletal, their leaves brown and rattling in the hot wind. Clara remembered when this creek ran full and clear, when children would splash in the deeper pools and women would do their washing on the banks. The drought had changed everything, turned the landscape hostile and unforgiving. She thought of her parents, of how they had struggled against forces beyond their control. Drought, economic downturns, the crushing isolation of frontier life. They had been good people, honest and hardworking. But sometimes that wasn't enough. Sometimes the land itself seemed determined to break those who tried to tame it, lost in thought. Clara didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until the rider was nearly upon her. She looked up to see a man on a dusty black horse, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. The man reined in his horse at the sight of her, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Ma'am?" he said simply. His voice was deep and quiet, like distant thunder. Clara nodded in return, suddenly conscious of her bare feet and disheveled appearance. "Sir." For a moment, neither spoke. The stranger's face was weathered but not old, perhaps 30 or so, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. His clothes, while dusty from travel, were of good quality, not flashy like a gambler's, but well-made and practical. "Creek's running low," he observed, his gaze moving from her to the pitiful stream. "Everything's running low these days," Clara replied before she could stop herself. Something that might have been understanding flickered in his eyes. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a canteen, offering it to her. "Water's still cool. Filled it at the well this morning." Clara hesitated. In her current position, accepting charity was both necessary and humiliating. "Thank you, but I'm fine." The man studied her for a moment, then dismounted with fluid ease. He walked to the creek's edge and knelt, letting his horse drink from the shallow water. "Name's Luke Thornton," he said without looking at her. "Got a ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Clara Morrison," she replied automatically, then wished she hadn't. Her name was poison in this town, but if Luke recognized it, he gave no sign. He simply nodded and stood, leading his horse back to firmer ground. "Best head back to town soon," he advised. "Storm's building to the west. Dust storm, by the look of it." Clara glanced at the horizon and saw he was right. Dark clouds were gathering, but they promised no rain, only wind and choking dust. She quickly pulled on her boots and stood. "I'll walk you back," Luke said. It wasn't a question. "That's not necessary." "Maybe not," he interrupted gently. "But I'm headed that way anyway." They walked in silence, Luke leading his horse, Clara trying not to notice the way people stared as they entered town. A woman escorting a man, or being escorted by one, was always cause for gossip, and Clara's reputation could hardly afford more damage. At the hotel, Luke stopped. "You take care, Miss Morrison," he said, touching his hat brim again. "Mr. Thornton," Clara began, then paused, unsure what she wanted to say. "Thank you." He studied her face for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her carefully maintained composure to the desperation beneath. Then he turned and led his horse toward the livery stable without another word. Clara hurried inside just as the first gusts of the storm hit from her window. She watched the dust cloud roll in like a brown wall, swallowing the town in its gritty embrace. Soon she could see nothing but swirling darkness. That evening, after the storm had passed and left everything coated in a fine layer of dust, Clara ventured out to the cafe again. She had eaten nothing all day, and hunger finally overcame pride. The dinner crowd was thin. Times were hard for everyone, but conversation stopped when she entered. She took a seat at the corner table, acutely aware of the whispers and stares. When the serving girl approached, Clara ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a bowl of beans and a piece of cornbread. "That'll be 15 cents, the girl said apologetically. "Mr. Hutchins says, cash in advance. Yes, I understand." Clara counted out the coins, trying not to think about how rapidly her money was disappearing. She was halfway through her meager meal when a shadow fell across her table. Luke Thornton stood there, hat in hand, a cup of coffee in the other. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Clara glanced around the room. Every eye was on them. "People will talk," she warned. "Let them," Luke said, pulling out a chair. "Never found gossip to be worth much anyway." He sat down and sipped his coffee in silence while Clara finished her meal. When the serving girl came to clear her bowl, Luke said quietly, "Put the lady's meal on my tab, and bring her a slice of that apple pie I saw in the kitchen." "Mr. Thornton, I can't," Clara began. "It's just pie," he said mildly. "No need to make a fuss." The pie arrived, and despite her protests, Clara found herself eating it. It had been so long since she'd tasted anything sweet, and her resolve crumbled with the first bite. "You looking for work?" Luke asked after a while. Clara's pride warred with necessity. "I am." "Can you keep books? Handle accounts?" "Yes, I helped my father with the store's books for years." She paused, then added honestly, though obviously, "That didn't end well." A ghost of a smile crossed Luke's face. "Sometimes bad luck's just bad luck. Doesn't mean a person forgets how to add and subtract." He finished his coffee and stood. "I need someone to help with the ranch accounts. Works steady. Pays fair. Think about it." He dropped some coins on the table, more than enough to cover both their meals, and left before Clara could respond. She sat there, stunned, as the cafe buzzed with fresh gossip. Luke Thornton, who rarely came to town and spoke even less, had just offered work to the Morrison girl, the one everyone called a burden, later in her room. Clara stood at the window looking out at the darkness. The stars were brilliant after the dust storm, as if the wind had scoured the sky clean. Somewhere out there, 10 miles north, was a ranch and a man who had shown her simple kindness without asking for anything in return. She thought about the knowing looks she'd received in the cafe, the whispers that would follow. A young woman working for a bachelor rancher. The implications were clear. The damage to her reputation potentially irreparable. But then again, what reputation did she have left to protect? Clara touched the glass, feeling its coolness against her palm. Tomorrow she would have to make a choice. She could stay in town, scrambling for whatever menial work she could find, slowly starving while trying to pay off debts that would haunt her forever. Or she could take a chance on the quiet stranger who had looked at her and seen something more than a burden. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Out in the darkness, a coyote called, and others answered, their cries echoing across the empty land. Clara listened to their wild music and felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Perhaps there was still a place for her in this harsh country, a way forward that she hadn't seen before. Tomorrow she would find Luke Thornton and accept his offer. Let the town talk. She had survived their whispers this long. She could survive them a while longer, and maybe, just maybe, 10 miles north of Dust Creek, she might find something more than work. She might find a reason to keep fighting against the forces that seemed determined to grind her down to nothing. The candle flickered in a draft, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Clara prepared for bed, her mind already turning over the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time since returning to Dust Creek, she didn't feel entirely alone. Somewhere in the darkness, a man named Luke Thornton was offering her a chance. It wasn't charity or pity, it was work, honest work, and that was all she had ever wanted. The pounding on her door came just after midnight. Clara jolted awake, heart racing. As the aggressive knocking continued, she pulled her shawl around her shoulders and approached the door cautiously. "Open up, Miss Morrison. We know you're in there." The voice was rough, unfamiliar. Clara's hands trembled as she cracked the door open, keeping the chain latched. 3 men stood in the dimly lit hallway. 2 she didn't recognize, and 1 she did. Marcus Crane, the most ruthless debt collector in 3 counties, tipped his hat mockingly. "Evening, Miss Morrison. Or should I say morning. Sorry to disturb your beauty sleep, but business is business. Mr. Crane, it's the middle of the night. Money doesn't sleep. Miss, neither do debts." He produced a sheaf of papers from his coat. "Your father owed my client, Mr. Josiah Blackwood of Denver, the sum of $300, with interest. That's now $420. We're here to collect." Clara's mouth went dry. "I don't have that kind of money. I've only just returned." "Then you'll sign over the deed to the store property." Crane interrupted. "It's worth about that much, maybe a little more. You sign. We're square, and everybody goes home happy." "I need time to review the documents. To speak with a lawyer." Crane's companion, a broad-shouldered man with scarred knuckles, stepped forward. "Lady doesn't seem to understand. Marcus, maybe we need to explain better." Clara tried to close the door, but Crane's boot blocked it. Now, Miss Morrison, no need for unpleasantness. Just sign the papers and we'll be on our way." "I won't sign anything under duress," Clara said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice despite her fear. The scarred man pushed harder against the door, and the chain groaned under the pressure. Clara stumbled backward as it gave way, and the 3 men entered her room. She backed against the window, looking frantically for escape or help, but the street below was empty. "Last chance," Crane said, laying the papers on her small table. "Sign, or we'll have to pursue other methods of collection. Judge Henderson is a personal friend. You understand." Amazing how quickly a court can rule when properly motivated. The scarred man moved closer, and Clara could smell whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be so stubborn. Bad things happen to stubborn women out here." Just as Clara's fear peaked, footsteps echoed in the hallway. "What's all this racket?" Josiah Wells, the hotel clerk, appeared in the doorway. Holding a lamp, his eyes widened at the scene. "Nothing that concerns you. Wells," Crane said dismissively. "Private business. In my hotel. At this hour?" Wells stepped inside, his thin frame trembling but determined. "Miss Morrison, are these men bothering you?" "They're trying to force me to sign papers," Clara said quickly. "Then I'll have to ask them to leave. Business hours are—" The scarred man grabbed Wells by the shirt front. "Maybe you didn't hear Mr. Crane. This ain't your concern. Let him go," Clara cried. The sound of a gun being cocked froze everyone in place. Luke Thornton stood in the doorway, his revolver steady in his hand. He was fully dressed despite the hour, as if he'd been awake and waiting. "Evening, gentlemen," Luke said calmly. "Seems like you're disturbing the peace. And the lady—" Crane recovered first. "This isn't your business. Thornton made it my business when I heard the commotion. Now, I believe Mr. Wells asked you to leave his establishment." The scarred man released Wells, who scrambled back. "You don't want to get involved in this. Cowboy, Mr. Blackwood has a long reach. So does a .45. Luke replied evenly. Your choice how this plays out. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Crane gathered his papers with exaggerated calm. This isn't over, Miss Morrison. One way or another, that debt will be paid. The three men filed out, the scarred one shoulder-checking Luke as he passed. Luke didn't flinch, keeping his gun trained on them until their footsteps faded down the stairs. Only then did Clara realize she was shaking. She sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Wells fussed about, checking the damaged door chain and muttering about the decline of civilized behavior. Luke holstered his gun and studied Clara with those dark, unreadable eyes. You all right? Yes, thank you. Both of you. She looked between Luke and Wells. I don't know what would have happened if... Don't think about it. Luke cut her off gently. Wells, can you move Miss Morrison to another room? One with a better lock? Of course, Wells said, still flustered. I have one at the end of the hall. I'll get the key. After Wells left, Luke moved to the window, checking the street below. They'll be back. Men like Crane don't give up easy. I know, Clara said quietly. But I won't sign away my father's store. It's all I have left of them. Sometimes, holding on costs more than letting go. Luke observed. Clara's temper flared. Easy for you to say. You have your ranch, your freedom. That store is my only asset, my only chance to... She stopped, embarrassment replacing anger. I'm sorry. You just saved me from... I have no right to... You have every right, Luke said, turning from the window. But that offer of work still stands. My ranch is harder for men like Crane to find in the middle of the night. The implication hung in the air. A young unmarried woman living at a bachelor's ranch. The scandal would be enormous. But scandal seemed a small price compared to what had almost happened tonight. Wells returned with the key to a new room. As Clara gathered her few belongings, Luke helped Wells fashion a temporary repair to the broken door. The men worked in companionable silence while Clara packed. Her new room was indeed more secure, with a sturdy bolt in addition to the regular lock. Wells bid them good night with repeated apologies, while Luke lingered in the doorway. I'll be downstairs in the lobby tonight, he said, just in case. You don't have to, I know. He touched his hat brim. Try to get some sleep, Miss Morrison. But sleep wouldn't come. Clara sat by the window, watching the stars wheel across the sky. The night sounds of Dust Creek, distant laughter from the saloon, the occasional bark of a dog seemed menacing now. Every footstep in the hall made her tense. As dawn approached, painting the eastern mountains pink and gold, Clara made her decision. She dressed carefully, packed her few belongings, and went downstairs. Luke was there as promised, dozing in a chair but alert the moment she appeared. I'll take that job, she said without preamble, if the offer's still good. Luke stood, stretching muscles stiff from the uncomfortable chair. It is. Can you be ready to leave within the hour? I'm ready now. He studied her for a moment, perhaps seeing the exhaustion and determination warring in her face. All right, I'll get the wagon from the livery. Wait here. The sun was fully up by the time they left Dust Creek. Clara sat beside Luke on the wagon seat, her meager possessions in the bed behind them. As they passed through town, curtains twitched and faces appeared at windows. She could imagine the gossip already spreading like wildfire. The Morrison girl, leaving town with that Thornton fellow. And at such an early hour, too. But as the buildings fell behind and the open country stretched before them, Clara felt something ease in her chest. The morning air was cool and sweet, flavored with sage and dust. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals up into the endless blue sky. Luke drove in comfortable silence, handling the team with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything. Clara stole glances at his profile, trying to understand this man who had twice now appeared at her moment of greatest need. Why? She finally asked. Luke didn't pretend to misunderstand. My mother died in debt, he said simply. Watched her work herself to death trying to pay what my father left behind. Watched good Christian folk turn their backs on her because poverty might be catching. He adjusted his grip on the reins. Figured maybe I could do better. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. The landscape blurred past, stands of cottonwood along dry washes, distant mesas painted in shades of red and gold, the mountains standing sentinel over it all. This was hard country, unforgiving country, but it was also beautiful in its severity. "They'll come after me," she said. "Crane and his men. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Let them come," Luke replied. "My land, my rules. Besides, I've dealt with worse than Marcus Crane." The certainty in his voice was reassuring. Clara allowed herself to lean back against the hard wagon seat, feeling the sun on her face. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't running calculations in her head, wasn't planning her next desperate move to stay ahead of the collectors. She was simply moving forward, towards something new. The road curved around a massive red rock formation, and Luke pointed ahead. "There," he said. "That's home." Clara looked and saw a valley spreading before them, greener than the surrounding country, with a ribbon of creek running through it. In the distance, she could make out buildings. A house, a barn, corrals. It looked solid and permanent, like it had grown from the land itself rather than been built upon it. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's hard work," Luke corrected, but she caught the pride in his voice. "Especially with this drought. But the water rights are good, and there's enough graze if we're careful." The word hung between them, full of possibility and complication. Clara was suddenly very aware that she was placing herself entirely in this man's power, miles from town, with no chaperone and no protection save his honor. As if reading her thoughts, Luke said, "There's a separate bunkhouse where you'll stay. Used to be the foreman's quarters before I had to let him go. It's clean and private. You'll take your meals at the main house. But otherwise, your time is your own." The knot of tension Clara hadn't fully acknowledged eased. Luke Thornton was offering her work and shelter. Nothing more. Whether she was disappointed or relieved by that fact was something she didn't care to examine too closely. As they descended into the valley, Clara felt she was crossing more than just physical distance. Behind her lay Dust Creek with its whispers and debts and men who came knocking in the night. Ahead lay uncertainty, hard work, and the questionable protection of a man she barely knew. But also ahead lay possibility. And for Clara Morrison, who had returned home to find herself branded a burden, possibility was more precious than gold. The morning routine at the Thornton Ranch began before dawn. Clara had been there 3 days now, and she was beginning to understand the rhythm of the place. The sound of Luke's boots on the porch served as her alarm clock, followed by the neighing of horses eager for their morning feed. She dressed quickly in the simple work dress she'd brought, pinned her hair back severely, and stepped out of the small bunkhouse that had become her refuge. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain that would probably never reach them. Luke was already at the well, hauling up water for the day. He nodded his greeting. A man of few words in the morning, or any time, really. Clara had learned to read his silences, to understand that his economy with words wasn't rudeness, but simply his way. "Morning?" she offered, taking one of the full buckets without being asked. The weight of it pulled at her shoulders, but she'd be damned if she'd show weakness. "Storm coming," Luke said, glancing at the western horizon where dark clouds massed like an army. "Might actually get some rain this time." They worked in companionable silence, filling the water troughs for the horses. The ranch had 20 head of cattle, a small operation by frontier standards, and a half-dozen horses. The drought had forced Luke to sell off most of his herd, keeping only what his limited water could sustain. After the morning chores, Clara retreated to the main house where Luke had set up a small office. The ledgers were a mess, not from dishonesty, but from neglect. Luke could read and cipher well enough, but bookkeeping clearly wasn't his strength. Don't know how it got so tangled. He'd admitted that first day, showing her the scattered receipts and half-completed entries. "Been meaning to get it sorted, but..." Clara had assured him she'd seen worse. though privately she wondered how he'd managed to keep the ranch running with such haphazard records. As she worked through the accounts, a picture emerged of a man stretched thin, juggling expenses against dwindling income, making hard choices about what to pay and when. She was deep in calculations when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw 3 riders coming down the valley trail. Her heart lurched, thinking of Crane and his men, but Luke appeared calm as he walked out to meet them. The riders were Mexican vaqueros, lean and dusty from the trail. They spoke with Luke in a mixture of Spanish and English, their conversation animated with gestures. Clara caught enough to understand they were discussing water rights and grazing boundaries. After the men left, Luke found her in the office. "Neighbors," he explained. "The Herrera family. Good people. We share some of the grazing land. Have to coordinate so we don't overuse it." "Your Spanish is good," Clara observed. "Have to speak it out here. Half the folks in the territory have been here longer than any of us Anglos." He paused in the doorway. "You settling in all right?" It was the first personal question he'd asked since bringing her here. "Yes, the work is satisfying, making sense of chaos. If only the rest of life was so easy," Luke said, almost smiling. They fell into a routine over the following days, morning chores together. Then Clara would work on the books, while Luke tended to the cattle and fences. They took their meals together in the kitchen of the main house. Simple food that Clara helped prepare. Beans, biscuit, dried beef, the occasional rabbit Luke shot. During one such dinner, with the oil lamp casting a warm glow and the wind howling outside, Clara found herself talking about her parents. "My father was a dreamer," she said, pushing beans around her plate. "Always had a scheme to make the store more profitable. Invested in a silver mine that turned out to be salted. Bought goods on credit. Sure he could sell them before the bills came due. Hard to watch someone you love make mistakes," Luke said quietly. "The worst part was my mother. She knew, I think, knew it would end badly, but she loved him too much to say no." Clara set down her fork. "I won't be like that. I won't let emotions cloud my judgment." Luke studied her across the table. "Emotions aren't always wrong, Miss Morrison. Sometimes they tell us truths our minds won't accept. Pretty words, Mr. Thornton. But emotions don't pay debts or keep food on the table." "No," he agreed. "But they make the food worth eating." It was the closest thing to philosophy she'd heard from him, and it silenced her. They finished the meal without further conversation, but the atmosphere wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of 2 people thinking their own thoughts in shared space. The next morning brought the promised storm, but like so many before it, the rain skirted their valley, dumping its treasure on the mountains instead. Clara stood on the porch watching the lightning flash in the distance, feeling the electricity in the air that brought no relief. "Frustrating, isn't it?" Luke joined her, coffee cup in hand. "All that water so close, but might as well be on the moon. How do you stand it, watching the land dry up, your cattle suffer? Same way you stand watching your father's store sit empty. You endure because the alternative is giving up, and giving up means dying inside even if your body keeps walking around." His words hit closer to home than comfortable. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, though the morning wasn't cold. "Sometimes I think it would be easier to just let Crane have the store, take what little cash I could get and go somewhere new. California, maybe, or Oregon. Running's always easier," Luke said, "until you realize you packed all your problems in your saddlebags." Before Clara could respond, they heard horses again. This time, her instincts proved correct. Marcus Crane rode at the head of 4 men, including the scarred tough from the hotel. Luke set down his coffee cup with deliberate calm. "Stay inside," he told Clara. "This is my fight. This is my land," he interrupted. "That makes it my fight now." Clara watched from the window as Luke walked out to meet them, apparently unarmed, though she'd learned he always had a pistol within reach. The men remained mounted, looking down at him, a psychological advantage that didn't seem to concern Luke. "Thornton," Crane called out. "Heard you were harboring the Morrison woman." "Miss Morrison works for me," Luke replied evenly. That's between her and me. Her debts make it everyone's business. I've got legal papers here. She needs to sign them or face arrest. Show me a warrant signed by a real judge, not your friend Henderson, and we'll talk. Otherwise, you're trespassing." The scarred man shifted in his saddle. "Big talk for one man against 5? 4, Luke corrected. "That boy on the end doesn't look old enough to shave, let alone fight. His mama know he's out here playing outlaw?" The youngest rider flushed red, hand moving to his gun. But Crane stopped him with a gesture. "You're making a mistake. Thornton, the law's on our side." "Funny thing about the law out here," Luke said conversationally. "It gets real flexible the further you are from town. For instance, I'm within my legal rights to shoot trespassers, especially ones who come armed to my property making threats." "You wouldn't dare," Crane blustered. Luke smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Mr. Crane, I've been to war. I've killed men for worse reasons than protecting my land and the people on it. You want to test me, you go ahead, but I suggest you think real hard about whether that piece of paper is worth dying for." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara found herself holding her breath, her fingers gripping the windowsill. Then, with a muttered curse, Crane wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he called back. "You can't protect her forever." "Don't have to," Luke replied. "Just long enough." The riders departed in a cloud of dust, and Clara rushed outside. "You shouldn't have antagonized them. They'll be back with more men, or the sheriff—" "Let them," Luke said calmly. "Sheriff Whelan's a good man. He won't enforce Henderson's bought and paid for warrants." He looked at her then, his dark eyes serious. "But Crane's right about one thing. This is just buying time. You need to figure out what you're going to do about those debts." Clara felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders again. For a few days, she'd almost forgotten, lost in the simple rhythm of ranch work and quiet companionship. But problems didn't disappear just because you stopped looking at them. That evening, as they worked side by side repairing a fence damaged by the wind, Clara made a decision. "I'll sell the store," she said abruptly. "Not to Crane. I'll find another buyer. Use the money to pay what I can. Negotiate payment plans for the rest." Luke continued working, but she could tell he was listening. "It's a sound plan," he said finally. "Will you stay on here while you arrange it?" The question hung in the air between them. Stay on as what? Employee? Friend? Something more? The unspoken possibilities made her pulse quicken. "If you'll have me," she said carefully. "The books have never been clearer," Luke replied, which wasn't quite an answer to what she was really asking. Be foolish to let a good bookkeeper go. They worked until the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. As they walked back to the house, tools in hand, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, not the wild, desperate hope of a gambler, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who has found solid ground to stand on. Luke paused at the porch steps, looking back at the land spreading out before them. "It's not much," he said, "but it's honest, clean, a place where a person can build something real. It's enough," Clara said softly, and meant it, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Clara allowed herself to imagine a future here, not as a burden or a debtor, but as someone with value to offer, work to do, a place to belong. And if sometimes she caught Luke watching her with something warm in his eyes, if sometimes their hands brushed as they worked and neither pulled away, well, that was just another seed planted in dry ground, waiting for the right conditions to grow. The riders came at dusk, when the sky was the color of blood and smoke. Clara was in the barn, helping Luke store the last of the hay they'd managed to save from the drought, when they heard the thunder of hooves. "Too many horses," Luke said quietly, setting down his pitchfork. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the wall. "Get to the house." But Clara had already recognized the lead rider through the barn door, Jacob Forrester, the territory's most notorious land grabber, flanked by 8 armed men, unlike Crane's crude threats. Forrester operated with legal documents and hired guns. Stealing land through intimidation disguised as law. They're after the water rights. Clara breathed. Luke's ranch had the only reliable spring in 20 miles, liquid gold in this drought-stricken country. Luke's face hardened. I said get to the house. No. Clara picked up a pitchfork, knowing it was useless against guns but unable to stand idle. This is my fight too now. There was no time to argue. Forrester and his men had dismounted, spreading out in a semicircle around the barn entrance. The man himself was thin and well-dressed, looking more like a banker than a thief, which in many ways he was. Mr. Thornton, Forrester called out, his voice cultured and reasonable. I believe we need to discuss your water situation. Luke stepped out of the barn, rifle held loosely but ready. Clara followed despite his warning glare. Nothing to discuss. Forrester, the spring's been registered to this ranch since '71, you know that. But registrations can be challenged, especially when there are irregularities. Forrester produced a document from his coat. It seems the original survey was flawed. The spring actually sits on what will soon be my property. Forgery won't hold up in court, Luke said flatly. Perhaps not in a proper court, but Judge Henderson sees things differently, and possession, as they say, is 9/10 of the law. Forrester's smile was cold as a snake's. I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for the land, enough to start over somewhere else. Not interested. I thought you might say that. Forrester nodded to his men. Which is why I brought incentive. 2 of the gunmen moved toward the house, and Clara understood their intent immediately. They meant to burn it, to leave Luke with nothing but ashes and the choice between selling or starving. Wait! She stepped forward before Luke could stop her. Mr. Forrester, you're a businessman. Surely we can come to an arrangement that doesn't involve destruction. Forrester's pale eyes fixed on her with interest. Miss Morrison, isn't it? The debtor's daughter? What could you possibly offer? Clara's mind raced. Information. My father's store received goods from all over the territory. I know which ranchers are struggling, which claims are about to be abandoned. Valuable intelligence for someone in your line of work. Luke turned to stare at her, and she could feel his shock and growing anger, but she kept her eyes on Forrester, praying he would take the bait. Interesting, Forrester mused. But I have my own sources. Not like mine. Clara pressed. People told my father things they'd never tell you. I have his journals, his private notes, a gold mine of information about every family in 3 counties. It was a lie. Of course. Her father's journals contain nothing but inventory lists and increasingly desperate calculations, but Forrester didn't know that. Show me, Forrester demanded. They're hidden. I'll need time to retrieve them. Clara felt sweat trickle down her back despite the cooling evening air. Give us a week. If the information isn't worth your while, Luke will discuss selling. But no violence, no burning, a civilized negotiation. Forrester considered this, while his men shifted restlessly. The moment stretched taut, balanced on a knife's edge between violence and reprieve. Then, from the darkness beyond the ranch buildings, came the sound of more horses. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons, as riders emerged from 3 directions, the Herrera family Luke had mentioned, along with other neighboring ranchers, all armed and ready. Evening, Forrester, called Don Alejandro Herrera, his rifle trained steady. Heard you were paying a visit. Thought we'd drop by too. Clara nearly sagged with relief. Luke must have suspected trouble and sent word to his neighbors. The odds had shifted dramatically. Forrester's 8 men now faced nearly 20. Gentlemen, Forrester said smoothly, though Clara caught the tightness in his voice. A simple business discussion. No need for such enthusiasm. Our water rights are all connected. Don Alejandro replied. Threaten one, threaten all. Perhaps you should take your business elsewhere. For a long moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Forrester smiled his snake smile and mounted his horse. 1 week, Miss Morrison. I'll expect those journals." The land grabbers rode off, and Clara's knees nearly buckled. Luke caught her arm, his grip firm but gentle, holding her upright as the neighboring ranchers approached. "Thank you," Luke said simply to Don Alejandro. "De nada, we stand together or we fall separately." The older man's weathered face creased with concern. "But Forrester will be back. Men like him always come back." After the neighbors departed with promises of continued vigilance, Luke and Clara stood alone in the gathering darkness. She could feel his anger like heat from a forge. "Journals," he said quietly. "Information about struggling families? I was buying time. By offering to betray your neighbors, people who trusted your father. The accusation stung because it was fair. I would never have actually. Forrester doesn't know that. Now he thinks you're for sale, just haggling over price." Luke's voice was controlled, which somehow made it worse. "Is that what you learned in the city? That everything's negotiable, everyone's expendable?" "I learned that survival sometimes requires difficult choices." Clara shot back, her own temper rising. "I was trying to save your ranch. My ranch isn't worth becoming like them." They stood facing each other, the space between them charged with emotion. Then Luke turned and walked toward the house, leaving Clara alone with her pitchfork and her choices. She didn't see him for the rest of the evening. She prepared a simple meal, left a plate warming on the stove, and retreated to her bunkhouse. Through her window, she could see light burning late in the main house, could imagine Luke wrestling with whether to send her away. Near midnight, unable to sleep, Clara wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside. The night was clear, stars scattered like spilled salt across the black sky. She found Luke by the corral, watching the horses. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You're right. I panicked and said something foolish." Luke didn't respond for a long moment. Then, "My father was like Forrester. Used the law like a weapon. Took what he wanted because he could. I swore I'd never be that man." "You're nothing like that," Clara said firmly. "But I hired you partly because I was drawn to you," Luke admitted, still not looking at her. "That makes me wonder about my motives. Whether I'm taking advantage, just in a different way." Clara's breath caught. It was the first acknowledgement of what had been growing between them. "You gave me honest work for honest pay, a safe place when I needed it. That's not taking advantage. Isn't it? You're dependent on me for shelter, protection, income. How can anything between us be—" He paused, searching for words. "Equal?" Clara moved closer, close enough to see his profile in the starlight. "Nothing in this world is equal. Luke, men and women, rich and poor, strong and weak. We're all tangled up in dependencies. What matters is how we treat each other within those tangles." He turned to her then, and she could see the struggle in his face. "I watched my mother wilt under my father's power. Swore I'd never put a woman in that position." "Then don't," Clara said simply. "Treat me as what I am, your bookkeeper, your neighbor, your friend. And if someday I'm something more, it will be because I chose it freely, not because I had no options." The tension between them shifted, became something warmer. Luke raised his hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall. "We have a week to figure out what to tell Forrester. We tell him the truth." Clara decided that there are no journals, no information to sell, and then we fight. He'll burn us out. Maybe. Or maybe we burn him first. At Luke's sharp look, she clarified. "Legally, I've been going through your papers. That survey he mentioned, the original is filed in the county seat. If we can get there first, prove it's legitimate. It's a 2-day ride. He'll be watching the roads. Then we go at night, through the desert." Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "I'm tired of running. Luke, tired of being pushed around by men who think power gives them rights. If we're going to lose everything anyway, let's at least fight for it." Luke studied her for a long moment, and she saw something kindle in his eyes. Respect, admiration, and perhaps something deeper. "All right, we fight, but we do it smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Agreed. Clara hesitated, then added, "And Luke, whatever happens, I want you to know. Working here, being part of this place, even for a short time, it's meant everything to me." He did touch her then, just his fingers brushing her hand where it rested on the corral fence. "You've brought something back to life here. Clara, something I thought was dead." He pulled back. "Businessman again. We'll need supplies for the desert crossing, and someone to watch the ranch while we're gone." They talked strategy until the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. When Clara finally returned to her bunkhouse, she felt the weight of the coming conflict, but also a fierce joy. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came, Forrester's threats, Crane's debts, society's judgment, she would face it with a partner. The fire came 3 nights later, before they could make their escape to the county seat. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the terrible crackling of flames. The hay barn was fully engulfed, tongues of fire leaping toward the star-filled sky. She ran out in her nightgown, finding Luke already fighting the blaze with buckets of precious water. Without hesitation, she joined him, knowing it was futile but unable to simply watch. The heat was intense, singeing her hair and burning her hands as she worked. Sparks flew like deadly fireflies, threatening to spread to the other buildings. The horses screamed in fear, and Clara ran to release them from the corral before the flames could reach them. "Let it go!" Luke shouted over the roar of the fire. "Save the house!" They shifted their efforts, soaking the ground between the barn and the other structures, creating a fire break. Clara's nightgown caught fire at the hem, and she beat it out with her bare hands, the pain sharp and immediate. By dawn, the barn was nothing but smoking ruins. They stood together, soot-covered and exhausted, surveying the damage. Half their winter hay was gone, along with tools and equipment that would be costly to replace. But they were alive, and the house still stood. Forrester's warning shot. Luke said grimly, "Next time will be worse." Clara looked at her burned hands, already blistering. "Then we'd better make sure there isn't a next time." As the sun rose over the devastation, she felt Luke's hand slip into hers, careful of her injuries. They stood that way for a moment. 2 people against the world, bound by more than employment or convenience, bound by fire and choice and the stubborn refusal to surrender. "We leave tonight," Luke decided. "Forrester won't expect us to move so soon after this. Can you ride with those hands?" "I can do whatever needs doing," Clara replied, and meant it. The war for Luke's ranch, and for their future, had begun in earnest, but standing there in the ashes of what they'd lost, Clara felt more alive than she had in years. She had something worth fighting for now, something worth the pain and the risk, and perhaps, when the fighting was done, she'd have something worth building on these burned foundations, something that no man like Forrester could steal, because it would be forged in fire and sealed with courage. Word of Clara's survival at Luke's ranch spread through Dust Creek like wildfire after the barn burning. By the time she ventured into town for supplies, accompanying Luke on the wagon, the whispers followed her like dust devils. "There she is, Mrs." Adelaide Perkins hissed to her companion outside the mercantile. "Living in sin with that Thornton man, bold as brass. Heard she sold information about decent folks to that land grabber Forrester," another woman added, loud enough for Clara to hear. "Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Her father was a failure, and she's worse, a kept woman." Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin high as she entered Patterson's general store. The proprietor, Hiram Patterson, looked uncomfortable as she approached the counter. "Miss Morrison," he said stiffly. "I'm afraid I can't extend credit. I'm paying cash," Clara interrupted, placing coins on the counter. "We need medical supplies, bandages, and salve." Patterson's eyes flickered to her bandaged hands. "Heard about the fire. Shame about Thornton's barn." "Yes, quite a shame when criminals destroy honest folks' property," Clara said evenly. "I'll also need flour, coffee, and ammunition." "Ammunition?" Patterson's eyebrows rose. "That's not very ladylike." Neither is being burned out of your home. Clara replied, The ammunition, please, as Patterson reluctantly filled her order. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus Crane entered, flanked by 2 men. The store suddenly felt too small. Miss Morrison. Crane tipped his hat mockingly. Surprised to see you in town. Thought you'd be too busy warming Thornton's bed to shop. Clara's hands clenched, pulling at her burns. Mr. Crane, if you have business with me, speak it. Otherwise, I'll thank you to keep your vulgar insinuations to yourself. Oh, I have business all right. Crane produced a paper from his vest. Judge Henderson issued a new ruling. That debt to Blackwood. It's been sold, to me, and I'm calling it in. Full payment in 30 days, or I take possession of everything you own. The store isn't worth, not just the store. Crane interrupted, his smile predatory. Everything, including whatever claim you might have on Thornton's property, seeing as how you're living there now. Judge says it's all community property. Given your arrangement. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. That's not legal. We're not, Luke and I aren't what? Everybody knows what goes on at that ranch. Crane leaned closer, and she could smell tobacco and cruelty on his breath. Course, there might be another way to settle this. You're still a handsome woman. Despite everything, I might be willing to forgive the debt in exchange for personal considerations. The sound of a gun cocking made everyone freeze. Luke stood in the doorway, his revolver aimed at Crane's head. Step away from her, Luke said quietly. Crane raised his hand slowly, but his smirk remained. Ah. The protector arrives. Tell me, Thornton, does she pay her rent in trade, or is it charity work? Luke's finger tightened on the trigger. One more word about Miss Morrison's honor, and you'll be talking through a hole in your throat. Threatening an officer of the court now? Crane backed toward the door. That's a hanging offense, but I'm feeling generous. 30 days. Miss Morrison, pay up or lose everything. He paused at the door. Oh, and Thornton? Forrester sends his regards. Says to expect more fires if you don't see reason. After Crane left, the store was silent, except for Clara's ragged breathing. Patterson busied himself with her order, not meeting anyone's eyes. Luke holstered his gun and moved to Clara's side. You all right? No, she said honestly. They're destroying my reputation to force my hand. Either I become Crane's mistress or that's never going to happen. Luke said firmly, You can't protect me from gossip. Luke, or from the law, twisted as Henderson makes it. Clara gathered her purchases with shaking hands. Maybe I should leave, go somewhere they can't find me. Running won't solve anything, Luke said. Besides, where would you go with burned hands and empty pockets? The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She was trapped, as surely as if Crane had locked her in a cell. Outside, she could hear people gathering, drawn by the confrontation, their whispers carried through the thin walls. Saw her coming out of his bedroom at dawn. No better than a sporting woman. Poor Luke, taken in by a Jezebel. Clara straightened her spine and walked out into the glare of judgment. The crowd parted before her, but their eyes followed, full of condemnation and sick curiosity. She climbed onto the wagon seat beside Luke, aware that every moment in his company added to her ruined reputation. They hate me, she said quietly, as Luke drove out of town. They fear you, Luke corrected. You're a woman who won't bow down, won't play by their rules. That terrifies them more than any outlaw. Is that what you see? A woman who won't bow down? Clara asked. Or do you see what they see? A burden, a fallen woman, a debt that walks on 2 legs? Luke was quiet for a long moment, navigating the rutted road. You want to know what I see? I see someone who walked through fire to save my horses, who faces down men like Crane without flinching, who brought order to my chaos and light to my darkness. He glanced at her. I see the woman I'm falling in love with, and to hell with what anyone else thinks. Clara's breath caught. Luke! I know, he interrupted. Wrong time, wrong circumstances. You're dependent on me. Your reputation's in ruins because of me. A decent man would send you away for your own good." His hands tightened on the reins. "But I'm selfish enough to want you to stay, even if it damns us both." "I'm not some innocent led astray," Clara said fiercely. "I chose to come to your ranch. I choose to stay. If that makes me fallen in their eyes, so be it. I'd rather fall with you than stand with them." They rode in charged silence, both aware they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Back at the ranch, Don Alejandro Herrera was waiting with his sons, rifles at the ready. Heard Crane was making threats in town. The older man said, "Thought you might need extra eyes tonight." "Grateful for it," Luke said, shaking his hand. "Coffee's on the stove." As the men discussed defensive positions, Clara retreated to the bunkhouse to change her bandages. Her hands were healing, but still tender. Each movement a reminder of the night they'd fought the fire together. She was struggling with the wrappings when a soft knock interrupted. "It's Maria," a feminine voice called. "Don Alejandro's daughter. May I come in?" Clara opened the door to find a young woman with kind eyes and a determined expression. "Miss Morrison, I brought proper salve for your burns, and perhaps we could talk." Maria entered without waiting for permission, setting down a basket of medical supplies. "The women in town are fools," she said bluntly. "They gossip because their own lives are empty, but some of us see the truth." "Which is?" Clara asked warily. "That you and Senor Luke are good people caught in bad circumstances. That what grows between you is your business, not theirs." Maria began unwrapping Clara's bandages with gentle efficiency. "My mother lived with my father for 2 years before a priest could marry them. The church ladies called her terrible names, but their love was true, and that's what mattered. Luke and I, it's complicated. Love always is." Maria applied the cooling salve. "But I see how he looks at you. How you look at him. That's worth fighting for, yes? Even if fighting costs everything. Especially then." Maria rewrapped Clara's hands with expert skill. "My father says Forrester's men are gathering. There will be trouble soon. You should be ready." After Maria left, Clara stood at her window watching the men patrol the property. Luke moved among them, organizing defenses, and she felt her heart constrict. He'd offered her his love in the midst of chaos, when everything was uncertain and dangerous. Most women would want flowers and poetry, courtship and propriety. Instead, she had burned hands and a burned barn, threats and bullets, and a man who spoke his heart while their world threatened to burn down around them. And somehow, that seemed exactly right. She emerged from the bunkhouse as evening fell, finding Luke by the corral. Maria Herrera stopped by. "She thinks we're worth fighting for." "Smart woman," Luke said, not looking at her. "Clara, what I said earlier." "Was perfect," she interrupted. "I don't need pretty words or proper courtship. I need truth, and the truth is—" She took a breath, then spoke the words that would seal her fate one way or another. "I'm falling in love with you too. Despite everything, because of everything, you gave me work when no one else would. You stood between me and men who would harm me. You see me as more than my father's debts or society's judgment." Luke turned to her then, his expression raw with emotion. "You know they'll never accept us. Even if we win against Forrester and Crane, even if we somehow clear your debts, in their eyes, you'll always be the fallen woman who lived with a man outside wedlock." "Then maybe it's time to make it official," Clara said quietly. "Not for them. For us, for the legal protection it would provide, for the future we might build if we survive this." Luke's eyes widened. "Clara Morrison, are you proposing to me?" "Someone has to," she said with a shaky laugh. "We're not exactly conventional." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, catching her face gently between his calloused hands. "Yes," he said simply, "though I've got nothing to offer but a ranch under siege and a reputation as the man who compromised you. And I've got nothing but debts and damaged virtue." Clara replied, "We're quite a pair." He kissed her then, There in the dying light, with armed men patrolling his land and enemies closing in, it was tender and fierce and full of promise, a claiming and a surrender all at once, when they broke apart. Don Alejandro was watching from the porch, a knowing smile on his weathered face. "About time," he called out. "Maria, bring the good tequila. We have something to celebrate before the war comes." And so they celebrated, a small group of outcasts and neighbors, toasting love found in the midst of chaos. Clara sat beside Luke, their hands entwined despite her bandages, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Let the town talk. Let Crane scheme and Forrester threaten. She had found something worth the price of her reputation, worth the danger and the uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring its battles, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged, beside a man who saw her truly, surrounded by people who judged her by her courage rather than convention. The attack came at dawn, 3 days after Clara and Luke's impromptu engagement celebration. The first shots shattered the morning quiet, sending birds screaming from the cottonwoods and Clara rolling from her bed to the floor. She grabbed the rifle Luke had insisted she keep close, her still tender hands protesting as she checked the load. Through her window, she could see muzzle flashes from the ridge overlooking the ranch. Forrester's men had taken the high ground during the night. Luke's voice carried across the yard. "Clara, stay down!" But staying down had never been her way. She crept to the door, peering out to assess the situation. Luke and 2 of the Herrera men had taken cover behind the water trough, returning fire, but they were pinned, unable to reach better positions without exposing themselves to the shooters above. A rider broke from behind the barn, one of Forrester's men, making for the house with a torch. Clara didn't think, just raised the rifle and fired. The man tumbled from his horse, the torch rolling harmlessly in the dirt. "Good shot," Don Alejandro called from somewhere near the corral. "But there are more coming." He was right. Dust clouds to the east announced more riders. Clara counted at least a dozen men converging on the ranch. They were vastly outnumbered. A bullet splintered the door frame inches from her head, driving her back. She heard Luke curse, then the thunder of return fire. The air filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of burning powder. "The horses!" someone shouted. Clara's heart lurched. If they lost the horses, they'd be trapped, unable to escape or pursue. She gathered her courage and darted from the bunkhouse, racing for the corral where the animals milled in panic. Bullets whined past like angry hornets. She threw open the gate, slapping rumps and shouting, driving the horses out and away from the firefight. Better to lose them to the open range than see them shot down or stolen. A hand grabbed her arm. Spinning her around, Marcus Crane stood there, his face twisted with fury and something darker. "Got you now, girl!" he snarled. "Forrester can have the land. I'll take payment in flesh." Clara brought the rifle butt up hard, catching him in the jaw. Crane staggered but didn't go down. His backhand sent her sprawling, the rifle flying from her grip. "You've cost me enough trouble." Crane spat blood. "Time to learn your place." He lunged for her, but a gunshot stopped him mid-stride. Crane looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, confusion replacing rage on his face. He fell to his knees, then forward into the dust. Behind him stood Maria Herrera, a smoking pistol in her hand. "No one touches my friend," she said simply. The gunfire was intensifying. Clara scrambled for her rifle as Maria helped her to cover. They made it to the overturned wagon where several defenders had gathered. "We can't hold them," Don Alejandro said grimly. "Too many, and they have the high ground." Luke appeared beside them, sliding in as bullets chewed splinters from the wagon bed. Blood ran down his left arm. "You all right?" he asked Clara. "Better than you. Let me see. Later." He turned to Don Alejandro. "If we can reach the spring, the cave system there, they'll burn everything." Clara interrupted. "The house, the barn we just rebuilt, everything you've worked for." "Things can be rebuilt," Luke said firmly. "People can't." A new sound cut through the gunfire. Horses approaching from the south. Clara's heart sank. More of Forrester's men, no doubt. They were surrounded. But the battle cry that split the air wasn't English. Apache warriors crested the hill, their rifles speaking thunder as they charged Forrester's positions. The ambushers suddenly found themselves ambushed, caught between the ranch defenders and this unexpected threat. "Red Cloud," Luke breathed. "I'll be damned." Clara remembered Luke mentioning the Apache leader, how they'd reached an understanding about water rights and mutual defense against common enemies. She'd never expected to see that agreement honored in blood. The tide turned swiftly. Forrester's men, prepared for an easy slaughter of outnumbered ranchers, found themselves fighting Apache warriors who knew every rock and gulch of this land. Within minutes, those who could flee were fleeing. Luke stood, supporting his wounded arm. "Hold fire! Let them run!" The shooting tapered off, replaced by the sound of retreating hoofbeats. Clara emerged from cover to see Forrester's hired guns scattering like quail. Several bodies dotted the ground, including Marcus Crane's still form. Red Cloud rode down from the ridge, his warriors flanking him. The Apache leader was older than Clara expected, his face weathered by decades of sun and struggle. He dismounted near Luke, studying the scene. "You fight well for a white man," Red Cloud said in accented English. "But you need better sentries." "Grateful for the help," Luke replied, "though I'm curious about the timing." Red Cloud's smile was sharp. "The Herrera girl rode hard through the night. Said friends needed help against those who would steal water." He looked at Clara. "You are the woman who stands with Thornton?" "I am," Clara said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Good. Strong women make strong alliances." Red Cloud turned back to Luke. "Forrester thinks he can take what he wants because he has papers and judges. But papers burn, and judges are just men." The Apache warriors were already stripping weapons and ammunition from the fallen. Don Alejandro approached Red Cloud with respect. "Will Forrester return?" he asked. "Not here," Red Cloud said with certainty. "My scouts will make sure, but in town, with his laws and corruption, that is your battle to fight." As the Apache prepared to leave, Red Cloud paused beside Clara. "The debt you carry, it is not just gold. Yes, it is the weight of others' judgment." Clara nodded, surprised by his perception. "Among my people, a woman's worth is in her courage and wisdom, not in what others say of her." He glanced at Luke. "This one sees clearly. That is rare among your kind." After the Apache departed, the survivors assessed the damage. 2 of the Herrera men were wounded but would survive. The building stood intact, though bullet-scarred, and Marcus Crane was dead, his threats silenced forever. Sheriff Whelan arrived near sunset with a small posse, drawn by reports of gunfire. He surveyed the scene with professional interest, taking statements from the defenders. "Self-defense, clear as day," he concluded, closing his notebook. "Crane and Forrester's men attacked, you defended, though I'm curious how Apache warriors figured into it." "Lucky timing," Luke said blandly. "They were passing through." Whelan's expression said he knew there was more to it, but he didn't press. "Forrester's screaming about attempted murder, demanding arrests. Judge Henderson's backing him, of course. Let them scream." Clara said, "We have witnesses, good men who'll testify to the truth." "Maybe so," Whelan said. "But truth and law don't always shake hands in Henderson's courtroom. You folks should be ready for more trouble." After the sheriff left, Clara found Luke by Crane's grave, a shallow hole hastily dug far from the house. He stood quietly, hat in his hand despite his bandaged arm. "Praying for his soul?" Clara asked. "Thinking about waste?" Luke replied. "Man like Crane could have been something better, chose to be a predator instead. He made his choices, we made ours." Clara slipped her hand into his. "No regrets." "None," Luke agreed. "But killing should never be easy, even when necessary." They stood together as shadows lengthened across the land. The ranch felt different now, bloodied but not broken, tested and proven strong. Word would spread quickly about the failed attack, about Apache intervention and Clara's part in the defense. That evening, as Clara helped Luke with his wounded arm, he caught her hand. You could have been killed today. Running into gunfire to save the horses, that was reckless. So was standing in the open to draw their fire so others could find cover. Clara countered. We're well matched in recklessness. Marry me tomorrow, Luke said suddenly. Before Forrester regroups or Henderson finds some new legal trick. Make it official before they can use our unwed state against us. Clara's hand stilled on his bandage. Tomorrow? But Maria can stand witness. Don Alejandro knows a priest who'll perform the ceremony without asking too many questions. Luke's eyes were intense. I almost lost you today. I don't want to waste another moment on propriety or planning. A rushed wedding after a gunfight. Clara said slowly. My mother would be scandalized. But would you? Clara thought of all the dreams she'd once had. A proper courtship, a white dress, a church full of well-wishers. Those dreams belonged to a different woman, one who hadn't fled creditors in the night or fought for her life at dawn. No, she said finally. I'd marry you tonight if we could find someone to perform the ceremony. Luke kissed her, gentle despite the day's violence. Tomorrow, then. And after that, we face whatever comes together. Legally bound. Harder to separate or intimidate. Ever the practical rancher? Clara teased, but her heart was full. Though I should warn you, you're marrying into debt. My dowry is a ledger full of red ink. And I'm offering a bullet-scarred ranch marked for destruction by powerful men, Luke replied. We're quite a bargain for each other. They sat together on the porch as night fell, watching the stars emerge. The day's violence seemed distant now, though Clara knew it was just the beginning. Forrester wouldn't give up easily, and Henderson would find new legal weapons to wield. But she'd stood her ground today, fought beside the man she loved, and earned the respect of Apache warriors. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it as Clara Morrison, the debtor's daughter, the fallen woman. She'd face it as Clara Thornton, rancher's wife, defender of water rights and justice. The transformation wouldn't erase her debts or repair her reputation in town, but it would give her legal standing and a partner who saw her as an equal, not a burden. In the unforgiving arithmetic of frontier life, that counted for everything. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The sound no longer seemed mournful to Clara. It was simply the voice of the land, wild and free, calling to those brave enough to answer. Tomorrow she would speak her vows under this vast sky, binding herself to a man and a place worth fighting for. Tonight, she sat with Luke's hand in hers, their matched wounds a testament to the day's battles and the battles yet to come. They'd painted their love story in gun smoke and blood instead of flowers and lace. But perhaps that was fitting for this hard country that demanded everything and gave back only to those strong enough to endure. The morning of Clara and Luke's wedding dawned clear and bright, with a cool breeze that promised rain. Real rain, not the teasing clouds that had tormented them for months. Clara stood at the window of Maria Herrera's room, wearing a borrowed dress of soft blue cotton, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. You look beautiful, Maria said, pinning wildflowers in Clara's hair. Like a woman who has found her place. I look like a woman who's been in a gunfight, Clara corrected, examining her bandaged hands. Not exactly the bride I imagined I'd be, but exactly the bride Luke needs, Maria replied firmly. Come, Father Miguel is waiting. The ceremony was held beneath the great cottonwood tree by the spring, with only a handful of witnesses, the Herrera family, Sheriff Whelan, who'd stayed to see it done legally, and, surprisingly, Red Cloud, who had returned with 2 of his warriors. A wedding after battle brings strong children, the Apache leader had said when he arrived. I would see this alliance sealed properly. Luke waited by the tree, his arm still bandaged but his eyes clear and certain. He wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed by Maria's careful hands. When he saw Clara approaching, his face softened with an emotion that made her heart skip. Father Miguel was an old man, bent by years but with eyes that missed nothing. He'd ridden through the night to perform the ceremony, asking no questions about the haste or the circumstances. Dearly beloved, he began in accented English. We gather in the sight of God and man to join these two souls. The traditional words seem to take on new meaning here, spoken under open sky with gun smoke still lingering in the air. When Father Miguel asked if anyone objected, Clara half expected Forrester's men to come charging over the ridge, but only the wind answered, rustling the cottonwood leaves like whispered blessings. "Clara Morrison," Luke said when prompted, his voice strong and clear. "I take you as my wife, to stand beside me in drought and plenty. In peace and conflict, I offer you not wealth or ease, but partnership and purpose. I promise to see you always as you are, not as burden or blessing, but as my equal and my chosen companion." Clara's eyes stung with tears as she spoke her own vows. "Luke Thornton, I take you as my husband, to build with you upon this land that tests us. I bring debts and complications, a tarnished name and uncertain future, but I also bring determination, loyalty, and a love forged in hardship. I promise to stand with you against all who would tear down what we build together." Father Miguel blessed their union with holy water drawn from the spring. Fitting, Clara thought, since water was more precious than gold in this country. When Luke kissed her, she tasted promise and gunpowder, hope and hard reality mixed together. The celebration was modest, Maria's festive meal, toasts with the last of Don Alejandro's good tequila, Red Cloud's warriors performing a blessing dance that made Father Miguel cross himself nervously. But Clara had never felt richer than in this moment, surrounded by true friends under the vast western sky. As evening approached, a dust cloud on the eastern horizon announced visitors. Everyone tensed, hands moving to weapons, until Sheriff Whelan identified the lead rider, Judge Solomon Pierce from the Territorial Court. He said with satisfaction, "Seems someone sent word about Henderson's corrupt rulings." Judge Pierce was everything Henderson wasn't. Tall, austere, with the bearing of a man who'd fought for the Union and carried those principles into peacetime. He dismounted stiffly, surveying the wedding gathering with interest. "Mrs. Thornton, I presume." He addressed Clara. "I've been reviewing some interesting documents regarding your father's debts and the claims against this ranch." Luke stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is our wedding day, which is why I came now." Pierce interrupted, before certain parties could interfere. He produced a leather portfolio. "It seems Judge Henderson has been rather creative with his interpretations of law. Forged surveys, backdated claims, partnerships with known criminals like the late Mr. Crane." Clara's breath caught. I mean Mrs. Thornton. That many of the legal actions against you and your husband are fraudulent. Not all your father's debts, I'm afraid. Those are real enough. But this nonsense about seizing the ranch, about community property based on your previous unwed status, all invalid." "What about Forrester?" Luke asked. Pierce's smile was sharp as a blade. "Mr. Forrester is currently explaining to federal marshals why he hired armed men to attack American citizens. It seems attacking a ranch where Apache allies were present has treaty implications. The government takes such things seriously." Clara sank onto a bench, overwhelmed. "So we're safe? From illegal seizure, yes, you still have legitimate debts to address, but those can be negotiated properly, through real courts with real judges." Pierce accepted a cup of water from Maria. "I'll be replacing Henderson temporarily while investigations continue. Justice may be slow in the territories, but it does eventually arrive." After Pierce departed with Sheriff Whelan, the newlyweds found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. They walked to the spring, where the last light of day turned the water to molten gold. "It's not over," Clara said quietly. "The debts remain. My reputation is still ruined. There will be other challenges." "Yes," Luke agreed, taking her hand. "But we'll face them as partners now. Your debts are mine, just as this land is yours." He reached into his pocket, producing a folded document. "Your wedding gift." Clara opened it with trembling fingers. It was a deed, half ownership of the Thornton Ranch, filed and witnessed that very morning. "Luke, you can't—" "It's done," he said firmly. "You're not living here on sufferance or charity. Your co-owner, full partner. The land title is in both our names now. But if my creditors, they can't touch it. Homestead laws protect primary residences from most debt collection. Pierce confirmed it. Luke cupped her face gently. This is your home now, Clara. Not as my guest or employee, but as rightful owner. Clara kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they broke apart, she saw their future spreading before them like the valley, challenging but beautiful, demanding but rewarding. I should check the ledgers, she said eventually. See exactly what we're dealing with. Luke laughed, the sound rich and warm. Today's our wedding day. The ledgers can wait until tomorrow. Listen to you, Mr. Thornton. Advocating procrastination? I'm a terrible influence already. The best kind, he assured her. As they walked back to the house, their house, Clara felt the shift in herself. She was no longer Clara Morrison, the debtor's daughter, the woman who'd arrived in Dust Creek with nothing but obligations. She was Clara Thornton, co-owner of a working ranch, wife to a good man, defended by Apache warriors and Mexican neighbors who judged her by her actions rather than town gossip. The transformation was complete, though the work was just beginning. Tomorrow she would write to legitimate creditors, proposing payment plans based on the ranch's actual income. She would face down the whispers and sneers of those who called her fallen. She would help Luke rebuild what fire had taken, expand what drought had diminished. But tonight, she would celebrate the greatest victory of all, finding a place where she was not a burden but a partner, not a debt but an asset. The land had tested her with fire and lead, drought and desperation. She had answered with courage and determination, earning her place through struggle rather than birthright. Inside the house, oil lamps cast warm light through windows shot through with bullet holes, battle scars that would remind them of what they'd survived together. Clara paused on the threshold, looking back at the land spreading out under stars. No regrets, Luke asked, reading her mood as he so often did. None, Clara said, and meant it. They called me a burden for the debts I carried, but you saw something different. I saw a woman who could help bear the load, Luke said simply. Someone strong enough to build something lasting in this unforgiving place. They entered their home together, closing the door on the day's wonders and the night's promise. Outside, the wind carried the scent of distant rain, that eternal hope of the drought-stricken land. But inside was warmth and light, and the beginning of a partnership that would weather whatever storms might come. Clara Thornton had found her place at last, not through escape from her burdens, but through facing them. Not through charity, but through courage. Not alone, but with a partner who valued her strength over her struggles. The arithmetic of her life had finally balanced, not in ledgers, but in the currency of respect, love, and belonging. In the distance, thunder rumbled like a promise. The drought would break eventually. The land would bloom again. And Clara and Luke would be here to see it, rooted as deep as the cottonwoods by the spring, as enduring as the mountains that stood witness to their vows. The girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but debts had become a woman with everything that mattered, a home, a purpose, and a love strong enough to build a future on, here in the unforgiving beauty of the American frontier. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Luke's journey in the comments below. We'd love to hear what touched your heart in their story of courage, love, and redemption against all odds.